Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Bill Winky for 20 fast questions on late season whitetail hunting. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative. And today we're playing 20 questions with the one and only Bill Winky. You know him from Midwest Whitetail and Bow Hunting Whitetails with Bill Winky and countless articles over the years and Peterson's Bow Hunting and other places as well. He's one of the foremost authorities on whitetail hunting success, bow hunting especially. And so today I wanted to run him through 20 questions, 20 relatively rapid fire questions about hunting the late season to get a really clear understanding of what the Winky way is for this, sometimes really challenging part of the hunting season. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to beat around the bush. We're not going to take a long time telling stories. This is going to be fast. This is going to be to the point ideas, tactics, strategies for filling your tag in these final weeks, maybe month and a half-ish of the season, depending on where you live. It might be even less than that. It might be 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But there's certainly some good hunts to be had. I'll reiterate something that I mentioned probably 2 weeks ago, I guess, at the end of my kind of review of late season hunting tactics. And that's that this time of year is such a great time to invite somebody out there with you, to take your kids, to go out there with your dad or your grandpa or your spouse or a buddy that wants to learn to hunt. Especially if you don't have a specific buck that you're after and you're just trying to have a fun way to wrap up the year, that's a great way to do it. On the flip side, though, if you are trying to kill that one special buck or still trying to kill a mature buck and you have, the special set of circumstances that Bill's going to tell you about, and you have to be extra careful with how you do it and you're really trying to be tactical, well, what we're going to talk about today should help you do that as well. So without much further ado, I do want to just give you a quick reminder. If you're looking to do any last minute Christmas shopping, MeatEater and First Light, we've got a whole lot of options over on the MeatEater store, which you can find if you go to the MeatEater.com. You still have, these hats are out right now. They're all sold out, but the Wired Hunt t-shirts are still available. Signed copies of my book, That Wild Country, is still available. The Wired to Hunt buck grunt that I helped design, that's still for sale over on the Phelps Game Calls website. So a handful of ideas there to check out if you need them. Our new jerky, MeatEater jerky, that's a pretty good stocking stuffer. So check it out if you're in need. Otherwise, today what we're really focusing on, though, is late season success. Let's get to my chat, my 20 questions with Mr. Bill Winky, the one and only legend himself. Here we go. All right, with me now on the line for, I couldn't tell you which number of appearances this has been, Bill, but it's been a lot, and I appreciate it. I've got Bill Winky back on the show. Bill, thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mark. Good to be here.
I always enjoy our chats. I want to tell you, I think I texted you this, but if not, I want to tell you in person how much I enjoyed your appearance on our Back 40 series that we did with Jake Hofer. That turned out really cool. Your inputs were really helpful on that, so thank you again for that.
Yeah.
So today, Bill, we are talking in early-ish December, the late season, the core of the late season ahead of us. And my idea was to play a game, sort of. You might remember this from when you were younger. I remember when I was in junior high, we used to do this thing called 20 questions where you'd just be asked 20, kind of perpetually more detailed questions, I guess maybe this would be how it would be framed. And my thought was we could do this, but instead of talking about boys and girls in junior high, we're going to talk about late season whitetails, the Bill Winky way. So I've got 20 rapid fire whitetail questions for finding success in the late season. And I'm just going to jump right into it in the interest of time here.
Yep.
If you were stuck in an elevator with somebody today and you had 30 seconds to 60 seconds in the elevator with them, and you had to answer one question for them before the doors opened, and they asked you, what is the Bill Winky way for late season whitetail success? How would you answer that before the doors opened?
It's pretty easy, really. I mean, you've got to have food. You got to have ideally some cold weather, a little bit of snow helps, and deer that aren't heavily pressured. Bow hunting late season deer is really, really tough if you don't have those pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. Can it be done if you don't have those pieces of the puzzle?
There are people who do it, definitely, but they're a lot tougher than me because they're sitting in tree stands in travel funnels, or maybe they're sitting next to bedding areas, which is a little bit more risky, but it's cold. And that's the problem. Late season hunting is only really good when it gets cold, because if it's mild during the late season, they just feed at night and you don't see that activity. So when you combine cold with sitting in a tree with a bow in your hand, and I've done it, we probably have all done it, but gosh, I sure like those heated blinds now. That makes it a lot more fun. But yeah, it can be done, Mark. It's a painful process if you got to do it the hard way.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I, have taken my two young sons out hunting with me for a lot of years now, and oftentimes the period of time that I have the most opportunity to take them historically has been in the late season. And so we go into a box blind, I'd have a heater out there, and it was pretty comfortable for him, right? But the last 2 years, my oldest son, he's 7 now, he's wanted to get a little bit more adventurous with it more and more. So we've started kind of doing some like on the ground spot and stalk style gun hunts. And this weekend we did that, and it was really cold, really snowy, and there's no heater. We're out in the wind, and he's like, "Man, I kind of miss the ground blind right now, Dad. Those are some pretty nice hunts with a heater." He's all of a sudden understanding the real world.
Yeah, but, and there's, being tough is cool, but the older I get, I become less tough. Put it that way.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. You did a video recently talking about your late season approach, and you had 2 major cautionary notes, major points of concern that people need to watch out for as they approach late season hunting in that style you mentioned. The first of those was that you do not want to go into your good spots to hunt until the deer you want to kill is actually moving in daylight. And you kind of broke down why that's so important and how to do that. Can you dive into that for us and explain why that's so important this time of year?
Well, the deer this time of the year, if they've had any pressure, they tend to be real skittish, real tough to kill, because they just, they've been through it. They've been through the firearm season, whatever the case may be. They've had pressure. They're not coming out in daylight very much. So it takes time. The conditions kind of have to fall into place for a little while, and they've got to get more comfortable, not being pressured. And then finally they start moving in daylight again. And I've seen it back in my, years when I used to hunt on permission in a lot of places where there'd been firearms, hunted, deer drives, all that. Sometimes it takes 2 weeks before they get comfortable moving in daylight again. So you can see all that sign on the ground, and you can see where they've been tearing up the snow, if there's snow or whatever it may be, and you get excited and you think, I need to be sitting here. But you go into that spot, and then at the end of legal shooting time, you've got to get out of it. And that's about when the deer maybe are starting to move a little bit toward those places. So now when you're exiting, they're just reinforcing this whole idea that I can't go out during the daylight. I need to wait until dark. So you may only get a couple of really good late season hunts. You don't want to waste that equity or that capital, whatever you gained by being patient, by going in there and hunting a spot where the deer aren't going to be moving in daylight, because what you do, the damage that you do on the way out, might make it impossible to ever kill one there that season.
Yeah, this is, I guess, this is where the secret sauce comes in, trying to figure out this balance, right? Because to your point, you don't want to do it. You don't want to hunt those spots too much and educate the deer and then never get the chance. But on the flip side, there's also this challenge that I think a lot of us face, at least, where we are sometimes becoming beholden to our trail cameras and waiting for that buck to show up on camera before we go hunt. And then he shows up, there he is, and then he'd go on the next day, but then he's off doing something different the next day. How do you balance this need to wait, but then not wait too long?
That's more of something that you see early season and during the rut, where the deer are less likely to repeat a pattern. it's almost a guarantee if you see a buck in a certain spot during the rut that he won't be there the next day. So the trail cameras aren't super beneficial from that standpoint. They tell you that a deer is in an area, so you hunt that area. But during the late season, I find, especially once they get past that danger, fear, not coming out in daylight, they become very, very predictable, very patternable, because especially if the weather pattern stays the same and it stays cold, they almost fall into they become almost, I would say dumb. They're not really dumb, but they become so hard on that pattern that they'll follow it every day. And, if you're hunting one buck, that's a little bit tougher. But if you're hunting like 2 or 3 deer and they're coming to the same location, pretty good chance that once they start showing daylight, that you're going to have at least one of them there every night until the conditions change. You can anticipate it. You can try to anticipate it, but it's so risky if you get it wrong, because once again, you're going to ruin that spot. But if you're going to try to anticipate it, you look at that cold front coming in, and a really hard cold front during the winter usually gets them going that night. Not, maybe the next few days too, but you want to be there that night. If the forecast says it's going to get down to 2 degrees tonight, in my part of the country, well, that's a cold snap. You better be out there. But again, the cautionary note is, if he doesn't come out, you might have ruined that spot for a while. Yeah. And that's the risk, because they're really, really good at knowing when they're being hunted. You just can't overstate how important it is to keep that element of surprise. During the rut, you can get away with doing a lot of kind of, I would say, marginal strategies, because the deer are moving so much and they're going to be on their feet more. But during the late season, they've only got 2 places they're going to be: where they bed and where they eat. Yep. And especially if their options of where they can feed is limited, then don't screw that up, because that's what you're hanging your whole season on now.
So if all of this is predicated then on confirming that the deer I want to kill is moving in daylight now and here, how does your scouting differ now than it maybe did in the early season or during the rut, so that you can A, confirm what I just said, but then B, do it in a way that doesn't educate these deer that are so much spookier than they were at any other time of the year?
Well, I'm going to elaborate a little bit more. If you're in a situation where they're never going to get to the food in daylight, then you may as well swing for the fence. You may as well go into the cover or find the trails between where they bed and where they feed and hope to catch them earlier. But again, you're sitting in a tree, under some really rough conditions. So anyway, that is possible. That is doable. But to answer your question, obviously any long range scouting with binoculars would be useful, but the trail camera obviously makes that a lot easier. And even if you run a non-cell camera, you can go in there at midday and pull the cards and see what's going on. I used to do that during the late season, before I was running any cell cams. So you don't need cell cameras to make this work, and you don't even need cameras. You would need time, in order to be able to swing past those areas and glass them real quick, in the last 15, 20 minutes of daylight and see what's out there. But you just don't want to, again, my point is they're so hard to kill late season. You don't have anything going for you other than one thing that's very easy for them to stop doing, and that's coming to a specific spot to feed. If you give them any excuse not to do it, they're not going to do it.
With the cameras, since that's a big part of the possible scouting plan, how do you like to have those set up? What kinds of locations are you setting your late season cameras? And then number 2, what's the concentration of cameras when you're trying to figure this? Sometimes people might have one camera on a food source, in the rut maybe, or earlier in the year. But at this point, when everything is revolving around your food sources, do you really, have multiple cameras around a bunch of different entries and exits to these food sources? How does that look?
I don't. I'm pretty simple when it comes to that stuff. Some people love to have tons and tons of cameras, and I kind of like the whole game of figuring it out, like a little bit of a chess match still. And I don't have any, I don't begrudge anybody doing it anyway that's legal, but I would just put one on each food source, and I'd point it. I'd probably either have it in the food source or very close to it where you can see the feeding area, plus you can see the directions that the deer are coming from when they enter it. Unless it's in the timber where it's 100 or 360 degrees, where they could come from any direction, you can usually isolate where they're going to be coming from fairly effectively. Then I've started using the stealth cameras that have the revolver, and those things are super cool because you could put one in the middle of your little small plot or your small corner of the field or whatever it is that you're hunting, and it's got 6 zones, and the camera actually moves inside the body and takes a picture depending upon where it picks up movement. So it's not the same as having 6 cameras, but it's probably the same as having 2 or 3 cameras. So those are pretty cool. But I don't only use those. Anyway, the point is, if you can't figure it out with one camera, then you probably need 2. But usually you can figure it out with one because you can point it more or less in the direction where they're coming from, and then you can see what time of day they're getting to the area. And if it's 45 minutes after legal shooting time, you're like, dang, I'm not even in the game if I go back in the woods. But if it's 10 minutes, after, did I say after or before? After.
After, yeah.
So, sorry. So, but if it's 10 minutes after or whatever, then you're like, okay, I've got a chance here if I want to really push this. And, I could go in there a little ways and find the trails that these deer are using and try to catch them before, they get out into the open. I just feel sorry for people who do that, to be honest with you. It's so cold. And maybe certain parts of the country, it's not so bad. But for the deer to move really well in daylight during the late season, it's going to be really, really cold. And to sit in a tree stand, gosh, I've done it. And you better have good equipment because you can't last very long. Maybe you hunt the last 2 hours and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, keeping those hands warm, the fingers, that's so critical, especially when you're bow hunting and you've got a buck coming in, you've got to hold on to that bow, and those, I've had a few days where those fingers get real cold.
My toes turn into little ice cubes. It's amazing. Literally, I'm not exaggerating now. I mean, I've been through it enough that my toes right now are numb, and I haven't been hunting super cold yet. But, if you frostbite your toes a few times, it doesn't take very much before those things are almost perpetually numb. It'll be, by the time the late season is over with, they'll be numb. So it'll be probably February, March before I've got full feeling back in my toes. So, so even just saying, oh, it's cold, well, it can actually be, almost detrimental cold.
Yeah, yikes. A little bit more on those conditions. We've said like very cold is what we want. But when you say that, exactly how cold are we talking? Can you expand a little bit more on just the different conditions and how they impact deer? So other than cold, what about precipitation or wind? How does all that impact your late season thought process?
I think if it's 10 degrees below a seasonal norm, that's enough to call cold. So if it's norm, you can see some movement, but when it drops below, then you start to see almost like a little bit more panic. And when it's above the norm, generally everything kind of halfway shuts down in daylight, unless the deer are really, really undisturbed, because there's no urgency, there's no stress. They don't feel that sense of panic. The other thing, there's the late season is kind of complicated too, because if it stays really cold for a long time, they shut down. So then they move on a warm front. So it's almost like the fronts after a sustained period of, say, normal. So if it's been really cold and then you get a warm front, that can trigger a lot of movement. But if it's been normal or a little bit warmer than normal, then you get a cold front, that can also trigger that. And there's something in the physiology of the deer that has to change. It's almost like their thermostat readjusts. So you've only got a period of, say, maybe a month when that readjustment takes place. You get into January and they're like, it's 10 below zero. I'm not feeding, and they just lay up for 2 or 3 days or whatever the case may be. The thermostat changes. And there's some research been done on that I don't have my hands on right now, but I think you'd find it fascinating that if it stays cold for long enough, then the cold won't do it. the cold won't get them moving.
How how like how long of a period of that cold do you think we need? I'm curious about if you had to put a number on it, in which you could say, oh well, if it was 2 weeks of cold and then all of a sudden it bumped up 20 degrees, would that be enough for you to be like, oh, that's a day I want to hunt? Because when I would see, a 45-degree day in the forecast, I might be like, oh, that's going to be lousy. But I want to make sure that if you're saying there's a certain type of day when 45 would be good, what exactly would that be?
Well, it depends on whether you got snow or no snow also, because sometimes that warmer temperature takes some of the skim off the snow. Maybe it takes a little, ice off the top, makes the snow softer. It makes it easier for them to dig. Um, I would say if it was 2 weeks of really, really cold and it's 45, I think that'll kick them off for sure.
Do you find certain behaviors or food source preferences when you get a warm up like that have been consistent?
Yeah, they will tend to go maybe a little bit more towards greens than what they did. When it's really cold, they just want carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And, they are really attracted to the carbs, and they can find them in different places. But I've got greens and corn, and they're going to the corn right now. And we've had, I would say, slightly below seasonal temperatures, and it's supposed to get pretty frigid again here in the coming week. They're going to be on that corn really hard. It's like the rest of the year, they're like, yeah, whatever, I'll eat my greens. But the corn really comes into being super attractive when they get to this point now where the rut's over, it's cold, I need carbs or I might die. It's sort of almost to that point with some of these bucks. And you just see them just selling out, going to corn, when it gets really cold after the rut.
What about beans? I feel like that's another carb that a lot of folks love. If you had corn and beans, either or?
No. If you don't have corn, they'll eat beans for sure. The beans are more of a protein food source, a little bit less on the carb side. Sorghum has got a decent amount of carbs also, but not as much, per pound or per whatever, as corn does. Corn is like starch. I mean, they're just on that. But I've definitely had some great late season hunts on beans, but that's only because I didn't have corn nearby. They were going to go to, whatever was handy. But the farm that I own now has fairly low or moderate deer density, and I've got tons of food. So it's kind of interesting to see what they prefer when they have choices. And they are definitely on corn right now, but I'd say way, way more than anything else.
This is a larger set of questions here, but something that I've wrestled with at all different parts of the year. But I'm curious, in the late season, when you have a place to hunt that has multiple food source options in different directions. So it's not like they're all stuck going to the south because that's your only food source. But on a given day in the late season, if they've got corn to their east and they've got corn to their north, and then they've got beans to the south, and then they have, a recent cut over to the other direction. They've got options. How do you go about determining which one of those possible options is the best on any given night in the late season? Do you play wind into that at all? Is there anything else that helps you pick which spot on the dial they might go when there's a bunch of different ways they could?
Yeah, I think they'll use the wind more then. I think that it's a little bit tougher to put yourself in front of them because of all the options that they have. But still, they can get, after a certain point, so entrenched in a certain feeding area that they might give up a little wind advantage because now they've got so comfortable going there. But that's a pretty rare situation. Where most people hunt, the deer are still skittish. They're not going to walk into a cornfield in broad daylight with the wind at their back. It's pretty rare. I mean, they might on my farm, in another week or two because, excuse me, I'm not going to be in there. There's no hunting pressure. The deer might get so comfortable that they'll come into the feeding areas with the wind at their back. But normally you're going to need a crosswind or something like that. You got to figure out, and you can even tell that a little bit on your trail cam photos if you got cameras on each one of those locations, Because you can play the wind direction versus what direction the deer come from and what time of the day they get there, and you kind of figure it out. But when they have options, they do what's best for them.
Yeah.
And so they're going to play the wind.
What about situations where there's a lot of in the timber food, whether it be natural browse or mast, and maybe it's a year where there's just tons of acorns, and so that's still out there a lot. How does that factor into things for you?
Well, and that's the strength and the weakness of my farm. It's the strength from the standpoint as the deer get as much nutrition as they could possibly want, but it's the weakness that they don't have any urgency to feed because there's food everywhere. Yeah. So they don't have to move. And everybody thinks, oh, the deer move, you go to food every night. Well, what if the food is right there where they're bedded? You think they're going to move? No. The rut will make them move, but they're not coming out. They don't come out. So that means for the part of the year when it makes sense to go in after them, that's your only option, is you can't wait for them to come out because there's no urgency. There's so much food available to them everywhere they go. And that's good. I mean, you want that. But again, the deer are only very, let's say, killable when they're stressed. The more stress they have, the more killable they are. So without any stress, there's no urgency. They don't have to do anything. So anyway, to answer your question, snow is kind of your friend at that point because it covers everything. And it's a lot easier to go into a cornfield and smell, a ear of corn under 6 inches of snow than it is to find 2 acorns, that are, underneath one of the oak trees that haven't been eaten yet.
Yeah.
So I think that snow definitely is the big equalizer at that point, but it can be really tough. I knew a fellow one time, a good friend that did a bunch of timber stand improvement and then fertilized the timber. I don't know how he did it, but he fertilized it. And he said the deer never came out. He said it's the worst idea he ever had. He said because they never moved, they never came out. He said we hardly killed anything for 2 years. Wow. So that kind of goes to your point on that. If there's a lot of food in the timber, you're going to expect pretty low return on your investment of time sitting in the open.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned that it would be not necessarily fun because you'd have to be cold and be in a tree, but let's say that for some reason all of your crops gone next year.
Yeah.
And the only food source you had were those acorns on your ridges. If I told you next year, all right, Bill, you've got to kill a buck during the late season next year and you're not going to have your cornfields and you just have to take advantage of the natural food sources. How do you think you would, if you were forced in that situation, how do you think you'd go about doing it?
Well, I think then I don't think they see danger the same when they're in the timber. I think you could hunt them on warmer days. So I would just hunt the warm days.
Okay.
I don't think that would slow them down for feeding, 20 or 30 yards from the bedding area, or 50 yards or 100. I mean, you got to get some, comfort zone between you and them. It's just really hard because if there's snow on the ground in particular, you're not going to sneak in there.
Right.
It's like, it's either squeaks underfoot or it crunches underfoot and they can see it from a mile away. I mean, we wear snow camo now for almost all of our entry and exit. And that's even when we're hunting in the open.
Right.
Just by the chance that some deer is bedded close enough to see us passing through and still use cover, still sneaking through behind, standing corn if there's some, or a fence row or whatever, but wearing snow camo. The late season is tough.
It is. So speaking of, I've got two more condition related questions, and you mentioned one of them, which is warm weather, and maybe that helps you in a big woods type situation. But we talked about how maybe a warm up can help. But what if it's just consistently warm? Like we've had some late seasons where we've all been just waiting and praying and hoping for the big cold front, and we never get it. And we've got it's Christmas or it's New Year's and it's t-shirt weather. What do you do when your only time off and is stuck with that kind of set of conditions?
Well, you would have to go in after them for sure, because they're just not going to come out, even in areas without much hunting pressure, where they're not feeling, that vulnerability like they might in areas that have gotten pressure. uh, they still don't move well in the late season
Right.
when it's warm. And we've seen it. Like, again, my farm is a little bit different because there's not tons of deer, so they don't have to feed in the open. They do if it gets really, really bad, like it's been, but otherwise they just stay back in the timber. I've seen years where we could sit, 4, 5, 6 nights in a row in late December in spots where the deer had never seen a hunter that season and not see a deer. Um, so the only way you're going to kill those deer is to go in after them, almost like you do during the rut.
Okay.
Which I don't know how to do it exactly because I've never really wanted one that bad that late in the year. But if that's your thing, you'd have to figure out where they're bedded and then find, something as close to that as you can get where you're playing the wind and hope for the best.
Yeah. Okay. I had one more follow-up prior to warm weather on the cold side of things. So back to the cold fronts. There's a lot of discussion, and you mentioned this a little bit, around the best moments around a cold front. And you mentioned, the night of being great and maybe those couple days after. But what about when you have these fronts push through that come with a bunch of wind, like those blizzards that come in? You've got all this snow and it's happening tonight. It's way colder tonight. The snow is happening right now, but there's also 15, 20 mile an hour winds. Some people are like, man, I don't want to miss that because this is, yesterday was 45 and today it's 17. So should you be out there on that kind of night, or do you want to wait till it settles down and the bluebird skies show up and it's a little bit more relaxed?
I think you can hunt them both because I think that wind and that storm front going through is going to cover a lot of the coming and going, that you're, the damage that you might be doing that way.
Right.
So I would hunt them both. I would ideally have somebody that can come with a vehicle or something and get me out of there at the end of legal shooting time on the first evening. But even then, if it's windy and snowing, if you've got deer right there, non-target deer, you're not getting out of there without somebody coming and running them off. So you almost have to have that in the plan. And then the next evening might be the better one of two. I would say if you had to pick between when the front is going through and it's windy with a lot of snow, or the next day when you got high pressure and it's cold, I would take the second day if you have to pick one of the two.
Yep.
But there's no downside to hunting that blizzard or that really, that when the front comes through, because you'll see some movement then, but generally you can get out of there easy because of that, that whatever you call it, diversion or whatever the weather's creating.
Yeah. Yeah, I do love those windy nights when you can slip out and it feels like you're not quite invincible, but you definitely have a little bit more of a margin for safety versus the perfectly still, perfectly quiet, crunchy where they hear you a mile away.
Those are deadly. I hate
soul
those.
crushing.
Yeah.
Okay, so on that note, in this video that I referenced earlier, you had 2 cautionary notes. The second one was that you must have some way to get out of your hunting locations in the evening because of the scenario you just mentioned there. There's all these deer out there. How do you get out without spooking them? Can you walk me through, your best options that you currently use or have used to be able to exit a late season evening hunt without ruining it for the next time?
Well, I think if you have somebody that can come in there to spook the deer, that's ideal. And if you're in farm country, it's even better yet if they're on a tractor, because for some reason that rumble of a tractor and that, just that type of activity, the deer, they don't pay any attention to it. I mean, we started using tractors to access some of our more sensitive spots, driving right through the middle of the farm. And, I'd look at the trail cameras and, we'd drive through maybe at, 1 o'clock in the afternoon to go to the location. And then you come back out after dark, of course, and the deer are just minutes behind you when you travel through there on a tractor. But when you travel through there on a 4-wheeler, it's hours behind you. And if you travel through there on foot, it can be a day or more, before they're back to normal. So the comparison really leads me to the tractor is the ideal way to get in and out of sensitive spots in any kind of ag country, just because of the comfort that deer have with tractors for whatever reason. So that's That would be the very best thing. If you had somebody that could jump on a tractor, drive out there, drive right up to the blind or the tree stand or whatever, and you just climb down and get into it and keep right on going. Don't even turn it off. That would be the perfect solution. The second, if you're like, okay, it's just me though, like I don't have this other person. I've never done it, but I've had a number of people say that if you take a paint can and you put rocks in it and you run a string across the field and you hang it over a tree branch, and then the paint can is sitting on the ground, and at the end of legal shooting time you jerk on that string a few times and you rattle the rocks around, like on the other side of the food plot or the other side of the field, then at least they're looking in that direction, and they're not like, you could say, well, I could do that at my blind. Well, yeah, you can, but then they associate risk with your blind or your tree stand. You want that spooking to come from somewhere else. Like, I can give you a perfect example that one night we hunted a spot and a rabbit came running out of the cover and it blew the field. And you're like, well, that rabbit just blew this field. But how bad was that? Well, we came back the next night, all the same deer came out at the same time again. And, I ended up shooting one of them. So yeah, you blew the field, but it's way different than if you blow the field by climbing down out of your tree stand or out of your ground blind. So I just thought, well, what if you get a monster truck, like a little remote control monster truck, and you have, I haven't seen one yet that has like a remote start, or I'd have one. And just leave it in the blind or whatever, and you get there and you just run it out to the other side of the food plot and it just sits there, idling or whatever it does, so
That's
they can
amazing.
just fire it up and have it come tearing out in there. I almost guarantee you they'd be back out in an hour and a half trying to figure out, what was that rabbit or what was that crazy thing that came flying out of the brush.
Right.
So anyway, the bottom line is you got to be creative somehow if it's just you, or you've got to have a spot that's so easy, so well screened, where you climb out of your stand and you're in a ditch. And I've had spots like that, where if it's just you're not you and a cameraman and all your gear, you just climb down the back of the tree, you get right in behind a row of cedars, or you get into a ditch or whatever it is, and you're out of there. Maybe it's a creek, something where you just go slow and quiet, use the back of the tree, and you can get out. That will work too, but those setups are pretty rare.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point is, if they know they're being hunted, that's the whole game. If they know they're being hunted, you can't kill them during the late season. Sometimes you can during the rut because of what's going on, but you can't do it during the late season. They just aren't going to tolerate it.
What about bikes, e-bikes, regular bikes, anything like that? I know that doesn't solve your problem of getting out of the tree, but what if you can get out of the tree without deer spooking you, but then you're going to have to get past some fields eventually that have deer? Would taking a bike through there still be a better option?
Yeah, I think so. And you want the lights on, I think. I think it's almost like, I don't know what it is. It's just kind of weird. They just stand there and watch them go by. I don't have one. I've got like an electric 4-wheel buggy that we use sometimes. And we generally don't run the lights because we're not going past deer. We're usually taking, like a back trail back to the vehicle or back to the buildings. But I think if you got to go past the deer, I think you just go as fast as you can with the lights on. And I think they would just watch you go by like, what the heck was that?
Yeah.
Ideally, they can't smell you. I think if they could smell you, I think that would be bad. But they don't really know what that is.
Right.
It's not like that's something that they see every day. I don't think they're going to hold it. They're not going to see it as, oh, I understand that danger. That's a risk. I'm not going back there again. I think it's more like, that was weird. I just ran away from something, but what the heck was it?
Yeah. It's got to be got to be less bad than two-legged human form that they know is the most dangerous.
Way less bad.
Yeah.
Way, yeah.
So I know you've done some creative sleepover type situations in the past. I know you did that in the timber. I know you've done that in some blinds in the past, like during the rut maybe. Is there ever a situation in the late season where you have or you would consider sleeping overnight and waiting till they clear out in the morning and then going out?
Well, you could, but you better have a really effective way to sleep comfortable. And that bunker, that we put in. I don't know if you ever saw that one, but it was a well-insulated camper shell that Carson and I put back in the woods. And we hunted there one time this season. I figured we'd hunt there a bunch, but I would say it was in the 20s that night. And it was so warm in that bunker that we almost didn't need sleeping bags.
Wow.
So I think that would be the key if you're going to do that. It makes sense. Ground blinds are super cold to sleep in because let's say it's 10 degrees out. The air going underneath the blind is 10 degrees. So you're sleeping on something that's maybe a couple inches away, if you've got some insulation that's 10 degrees. But if you're on the ground, and let's say you're in a little building, or maybe you're even just in a bivy sack, for heaven's sake, you scrape all the snow away. Now the ground's probably 30 degrees, and then as you lay on it, it kind of warms up a little bit. It maybe gets up to 40 by the time you get up in the morning, right underneath where you're sleeping. That's way better than sleeping in the blind itself. Sleeping in blinds is really, really cold. I've done it a few times, and if it's cold at all, that's a miserable time. But the ground is way better.
So is there any situation where you could get away with running a little like buddy heater or something for periods of time to toast you up if you were going to do the blind thing? Or would just having that kind of, I guess that's no different than human scent. I'm trying to think through the implications of that.
The floor is just too cold.
Yeah.
It's just miserable. It's sort of like when I started sleeping out, people were saying, why don't you get one of those portaledges like the rock climbers use, and just stay right in your tree. Pull it out of your pack, set it up, stay right there, climb into it, climb back out before daylight, and you're in your two reasons against that. One is you're spreading a lot of scent because now the wind is blowing through there and carrying your scent a long ways downwind. The other one is you're always going to be whatever the temperature of the air is. That's always going to be what you're sleeping against. So if you climb down and you got a little bivy sack and a minus 30 degree sleeping bag or whatever, and you scrape the leaves away and you're sleeping right at the base of the tree, it's warm and cozy. And the bivy sack is going to, if it's nylon, it's pretty much scent containing. The wind blows over the top of it. The deer don't really pick up much odor downwind of you. You kind of get away with, almost like cheating. Think about, I know you do some elk hunting. Everybody thinks about spike camping out and they think, oh yeah, spike camping out, that's cool.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden you try that with whitetails and they think you're crazy. It's no different.
Yeah. That's a good point. Here's the flip side of this whole conversation. This side of the conversation, how to get out in the evening. That's what all the attention gets put on, right? For late season, it's how do you get out? How do you get out? How do you get out? A lot of times folks forget that it's not easy to get in sometimes for evening hunts.
Yeah.
Deer are bedding much closer to the food sources more often this time of year. There's not as much visual cover as there used to be. Everything seems to be louder. How do you, especially like where you hunt now, where you have these great big bluffs and hills over top of all your fields, how do you think about getting in for those evening hunts without spooking deer?
Ideally, you have top access where you're only hunting the stuff on top and you can come in from the top. When it's all bottom access, it's really tough because, especially if there's snow, because the deer can hear it a lot better because of the snow. You don't get that muffling effect like you do with a bunch of vegetation and leaves and stuff. But the other thing is they can, in theory, see you better. And I did a quick study on that and just went around one winter when we were doing TSI and just went to every deer bed I can find and just dropped down into it, put my head at about the height of where a deer's head would be. And there's only about 10 to 20% of them that can see anything. They don't just bed where they can see. I think they bed where they have a wind advantage coming in from behind them. But it's not like I'm sitting here where I can see everything below me. But there are a percentage of them that are bedded in those spots. So it's not easy. Like I said, the snow camo is better for that. Ideally, you would have some kind of a way, like a ditch or some cedar trees or standing crop to sneak through. If you can sneak through standing cornfield to get to the tree stand on the other end of it, that's pretty foolproof. But when you're just wide open walking across a cattle pasture, it's like, good luck. You better hope that the deer that you're hunting isn't near or isn't bedded where it can see. Because when the first one jumps up and runs off, the rest of them go too. It's a access is huge, in those situations.
Yeah. And sometimes in those scenarios, I know people like to get a ride in, right? Someone drives them in on the tractor or the truck and drops you off, and then they drive back out. And then the idea is that the deer feel, okay, the danger left. I've had some times where I've tried that in the late season, and it just, they're just even spookier because it's late season, so open. I've seen like just herds of deer just go tearing off, even when a truck or something just drives back there. Would you ever do something that late season, or have you seen the same thing?
I think, again, a tractor might be okay, but you need to do it early. You can't do it like 2 hours before, you'd have to go in late morning or mid-morning even, and give the deer plenty of time to readjust and come back, because they aren't deathly afraid of tractors. They're definitely afraid of four-wheelers sometimes, and they can be definitely afraid of trucks.
Yeah.
But they aren't definitely afraid of tractors. So in theory, you could pull it off, because they would start drifting back again if they don't have any other options. If they've got other places to feed, they're probably not going to come back. They'll just, shift their attention to a different spot regardless, because now they run in a different direction. Why bother to even come back? But I've definitely seen it when it gets really cold and the deer get really in that panic state where they're going to come back. So yeah, we know that they aren't going to come if they know if something's messed up. So anyway, the point is, it's just late season. You got to be really, really good at your game, or you've got to have a really, really good setup, because everything's in the deer's advantage by the late season.
So I've got just a handful more specific questions about kind of those little details, those little things you need to have dialed or be creative with. And one of those is just when you're actually in the blind or in your stand, again, everything seems elevated. It seems like stuff's louder. It seems like your movements are easier to catch. Those deer are just in general so much more wired than they were 3 months ago. Real quick, are there any little tricks of the trade you've picked up over the years to help deal with either the sound or sight issues that we have this time of year?
Start hunting with a muzzleloader.
Yeah.
No, and seriously, that's what you see a lot of people do. They switch over to the gun, and but there aren't any shortcuts. It's just a brutally hard time to kill a deer with a bow unless you've got a really, really good setup. And I don't say that lightly, because I've been doing it for so long, and I've tried to hunt late season for, I think, the past 36 seasons, and the amount of successes that I've had are pretty small. I've had a lot of close calls, and I've had some fun hunts, but you're going to get a lot of 70-yard encounters, and then you think, oh man, tomorrow I got it. Well, when you leave, you spooked 3 does on the fringe of the plot that you didn't know were there, and then you come back the next night and 4 fawns and a spike buck come out. It's just unforgiving, very unforgiving, and that's why that first hunt has to be so bulletproof. And they generally, if it's a concentrated area where you feel like, okay, I can get the deer tight, I got them bottled, those spots generally don't last until the late season. The food's gone. So a lot of times you're hunting bigger areas, like maybe it was a 4-acre cornfield or a 2-acre, whatever, where you're hunting the back corner of a commercial ag field. And now the deer don't have, they don't have any motivation to use the same exact trail. They might come to the same spot in the end, out in the middle or whatever it is, but they come from different directions every night. So yeah, you can be in the game and feel pretty good about it, but it's really hard to be right there on that spot.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I've lived that way too many times.
That's why the gun is the great equalizer. For the people who have got their butt kicked all bow season, it's like, give me the muzzleloader. I'm going to go, get a little revenge here. And you see that a lot. And I don't blame those people one bit.
Oh yeah. I'm one of them most years. Is there any late season scenario in which you would try a morning hunt? And if so, how do you pull that off?
Well, I think it could have been good still, because like on my cameras right now, there's a lot of rutting activity still on my cameras. And the bucks are still fighting almost every night now. I'd say they're more focused on just interacting and jacking around than they are on feeding. They feed, but then they go chase a doe off, and then they come back and feed, and then they fight with another buck for 10 minutes, and then they leave. And then you maybe pick them up on another camera quarter of a mile away doing the same exact thing on another plot. So I think they're still pretending like it's the rut, whether there's some fawns that are still coming into estrus or whatever the case may be. I don't think the rut finishes up as early as people think it does. I think it rolls clear into the early part of December, up until now still. I mean, these bucks on my cameras are still acting rutty. And I'm not saying that all the same funnels that you hunted during the rut when they were going from doe bedding area to doe bedding area, that those are still going to be good. But I think there's more random movement going on back in the timber than what people think still. So that's the one thing that has surprised me over the past few years is really that understanding that the rut, their behavior, their rutting type behavior lasts longer than what we think it does.
So you're saying, like, if you have a spot that you could get into safely for morning hunts in those types of transition morning zones, it could be worth it, at least for the first half of December?
I think so. I think if you've got any kind of an evening pattern that's working out or makes sense, you stay away from where those deer might be bedded. But there's nothing that says that a morning hunt won't work. The morning hunts definitely will work. It's just usually so cold, and you're so focused on those evening feeding areas that you don't really think too much about it, and you don't want to take that risk of saying, well, I know that the deer are bedded here and they're feeding over here. Maybe I can snuggle in next to where they're bedded and catch them in the morning. It's like you're almost like, whatever you say, cheating Peter to pay Paul or whatever, where you're pulling away from one or the other. But if you've got options where you can say, okay, I can do my morning hunts over here, but I've got my potential evening pattern that I'm waiting on for those pieces to click over here, then it probably makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Calling in the late season, especially when you're bow hunting. Is there ever a scenario you would try calling?
Again, it's shocking. I wish I could just send you. I looked at all my photos this morning, and I bet you on every single place where I had a camera, the bucks were fighting.
Wow.
Fighting. And it just went, it was like, I don't know if they were technically fighting. I think they were probably still sparring and just jacking around, but it'd be like this buck was over here messing around with this buck. And then, 5 minutes later, he was messing around with a different buck. And then a couple minutes later, two other bucks in there. It's almost like if two bucks get together anywhere, they feel like they got to, see who's the man. Yeah. So I think rattling would work. It does. Even on camera, you can see it does attract some attention because you'll see two bucks fighting in one corner of the plot, and then a couple frames later, you'll see the other bucks from the other corner coming over, to see like, hey, what's going on over here? So I don't think it's the same as during the rut when the bucks are fighting over does, and they understand that, hey, there's a doe there because these two bucks are fighting. It's more like, yeah, maybe I'm the man. These guys are over here acting like tough guys, but hey, I better go over there and show them that, I'm the man in this area. So it's almost like a little dominance thing because all of a sudden you mash them all back together again, in the big mixer, where during the rut they were kind of scattered around, but now they're like more concentrated and they're just trying to figure it out again. It's almost comical to watch what they do on these plots. So I think you could rattle. I really do.
How late do you think you would consider that? Is there an expiration date, or do you think you could clear on through the late season?
Yeah,
all the way through.
I think as long as they're carrying antlers, I think you could rattle. I really do. And I don't do it because I don't like rattling to begin with. I just don't like messing with antlers. But I think I don't see any downside to that because of what I'm seeing on my cameras and the way these deer behave.
So in the same kind of vein then, have you ever thought or tried a decoy for late season?
And there's, again, I'm a very simple hunter. I don't use scents. I don't do a lot of calling. I never use decoys. I just like the whole game of, being almost like getting the deer on his terms.
Sure.
It may not be the most effective way to do it, but two things I don't like about decoying. One, I don't like carrying them, because now you got to get them in, you got to get them out.
Yep.
So at the end of legal shooting time, how am I going to go get that decoy out of this field,
Yeah.
because there's probably deer there are going to be coming in or whatever. The other thing is, if the does come out first, then I've had some bad experiences with does not really liking the decoy. So I think in a really specific situation where maybe the only deer you're going to see is a couple of bucks that you're hunting, and then you got the decoy out there, it might be just fine. But on a really large scale late season setup, excuse me, where you've got multiple deer coming into an area to feed, I don't think it would be good. I just think there's too many eyes and there's too many things working against the decoy not spooking deer, and you also have to get it out of there at the end of legal shooting time.
Yeah.
And if you have that person that drives up to the the edge of the plot or the edge of the field or wherever you're sitting and they spook the deer off, well then yeah, you can run out there and grab it. But I don't know. They probably work. It's sort of like scents. People ask me scent questions and I don't know the answer because I just don't use them.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I feel like the same way. It's really intriguing. I'd be interested. I think maybe it could work, but do I really want to take the risk to blow my thing out to try it? I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, last question. What if we are just trying to kill does, and a bunch of them? It's late season. We need to do our doe management. We know we need to take some of these antlerless deer off the landscape. What's your advice for most effectively having late season doe hunting success and not ruining it all the first night?
Oh, for sure you got to have a gun and you got to stay back, because we've had some unbelievable, evenings of killing does in feeding areas when it's really cold. It's like I said, they're almost suicidal because if they don't know where that comes from, you shoot the first one, you don't go running out there and grab her and drag her off. You just reload your gun and you don't move, and you don't, the ones that were out there with her, they ran about 50 yards. Now they're standing back trying to figure out what happened. It's like thunder, it's just a sound, and then they start working their way back again because I really want that, whatever it is that they're going to feed on. I killed 5 one night on one food plot with a muzzleloader.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's unique because these deer aren't getting a lot of pressure. So it's not like there's a bunch of people running around out there with guns all the time. So it's kind of situational, but if you can stay back and all they hear is this rumble and a deer either falls or runs a little ways and then falls, they don't really know for sure what that was. That's the way to do it. You got to shoot them with guns.
Yeah, it's certainly a fun way. If you don't have a mature buck to go after in the late season, once I switched to doe mode, it instantly makes the hunt so much more fun all of a sudden.
Oh.
High target environment. I love that shift in headspace.
Well, it's easy too because now you can stay back.
Yeah.
All of these issues we're talking about kind of go away when you're 150 yards away.
Yeah.
You're not sitting right on the edge of the bow range of everything.
It's a pretty great way to end the year. So you can't complain about that. Well, Bill, last thing, where can folks catch your latest videos, connect with you? If there's anything else people should be checking out right now, where can they find it?
The only thing that I'm really doing consistently is the Bill Winky YouTube channel, and we're uploading to that quite a bit. So that's and I try to be as responsive as I can. If people have questions, in the comments section, sometimes you get the stupid stuff like you're aware of, but 90+% of our viewers are there for the right reasons. So you get some pretty interesting dialogues going on. It's almost like a little mini forum where people can, ask questions, and either other viewers can try to answer them or I can try to answer them. So that's the best way right now to catch up with me.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Bill, for this. Thanks for decades now of helpful articles and videos and help. As I've told you before, you've been a huge influence on me and my hunting over the years and so many other people. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. The only thing I didn't like about that was the decades part.
Yeah, sorry, Bill.
I wish it'd be like a handful of years. We could go back 30-something years.
Well, it's getting scary. I'm approaching almost 2 decades of doing this stuff too. The time is just going by crazy fast. So I guess we're still here.
And I appreciate all that you do too. You're a great spokesman for the hunting industry and for the sport. So thank you very much for the work that you do. I'm sure that you don't get many thanks it's pretty unheralded, the efforts that you're putting forward, but you're doing a lot more than most people give you credit for.
I appreciate you saying that, Bill. Thank you. Let's do it again soon. Let's chat again soon.
Sounds good. You have a good day.
All right, and that is going to do it for another late season episode of the Wired to Hunt podcast. I appreciate you tuning in all this season. It's been a fun ride. As I mentioned on Rut Fresh Radio, if you haven't listened to that one yet this week, go back and listen to that. I detailed some of the fun hunts I've been having with my son, and hopefully my second son will be coming out here with me soon. We've got some good late season weather that we're hoping to take advantage of as well. So enjoy. We've got pretty great conditions the coming days, so take advantage of those. Enjoy these remaining days and weeks of the season. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.